The Nowata Methodist Church is happy to produce a lot of different content for the edification of Christ's church throughout the world. This daily segment that you're listening to right now corresponds with the Daily Bible Reading Challenge, which is hosted by Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. If you want to download the list of readings that they publish for yourself or learn more about this challenge, this initiative, go to biblereading.christkirk.com. I'm Jeffrey Rickman. I'm the pastor here in Nowata, and I read from the Berean Standard Bible, which you can also find at berean.bible. Consider subscribing to this podcast to be a part of this daily effort to grow in familiarity with and love of God's holy word. Let's dive in for today. So a couple days ago, or about a week ago, this gal right here on my lap started coughing, and it started sounding gnarly, but I was feeling just fine until a couple days ago when I started feeling not so fine, and maybe you could tell from yesterday's recording I was not feeling very fine at all. In fact, I kind of fell asleep in the middle of reading. It's gotten worse, so we'll see how I do, but Abigail just woke up from her nap, and she needed her daddy to hold her, so she's here while I record, drinking my seltzer. So, we're going to pick up in Leviticus today. We're in chapter 13, and then we're going to hop over to Hebrews, and we'll see how long Abby can hold it together. Okay, here we go. Leviticus 13. Let's attend upon God's word together. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When someone has a swelling or rash or bright spot on his skin that could become an infectious skin disease, he must be brought to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons who is a priest. The priest is to examine the infection on his skin, and if the hair in the infection has turned white and the sore appears to be deeper than the skin, it is a skin disease. After the priest examines him, he must pronounce him unclean. If, however, the spot on his skin is white and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall isolate the infected person for 7 days. On the seventh day, the priest is to re-examine him, and if he sees that the infection is unchanged and has not spread on the skin, the priest must isolate him for another 7 days. The priest will examine him again on the seventh day, and if the sore has faded and has not spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is a rash. The person must wash his clothes and be clean. But if the rash spreads further on his skin after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he must present himself again to the priest. The priest will re-examine him, and if the rash has spread on the skin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. He has a skin disease. When anyone develops a skin disease, he must be brought to the priest. The priest will examine him, and if there is a white swelling on the skin that has turned the hair white, and there is raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic skin disease, and the priest must pronounce him unclean. He need not isolate him, for he is unclean. But if the skin disease breaks out all over his skin so that it covers all the skin of the infected person from head to foot, as far as the priest can see, the priest shall examine him, and if the disease has covered his entire body, he is to pronounce the infected person clean, since it has all turned white. He is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears on someone, he will be unclean. When the priest sees the raw flesh, he must pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean. It is a skin disease. But if the raw flesh changes and turns white, he must go to the priest. The priest will re-examine him, and if the infection has turned white, the priest is to pronounce the infected person clean. Then he is clean. When a boil appears on someone's skin and it heals, and a white swelling or a reddish-white spot develops where the boil was, he must present himself to the priest. The priest shall examine it, and if it appears to be beneath the skin and the hair in it has turned white, The priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a diseased infection that has broken out in the boil. But when the priest examines it, if there is no white hair in it, and it is not beneath the skin and has faded, the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. If it spreads any further on the skin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. It is an infection. But if the spot remains unchanged and does not spread, it is only the scar from the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When there is a burn on someone's skin and the raw area of the burn becomes reddish white or white, the priest must examine it. If the hair in the spot has turned white and the spot appears to be deeper than the skin, it is a disease that has broken out in the burn. The priest must pronounce him unclean. It is a diseased infection. But if the priest examines it and there is no white hair in the spot and it is not beneath the skin but has faded, the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to re-examine him, and if it has spread further on the skin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. It is a diseased infection. But if the spot is unchanged and has not spread on the skin but has faded, it is a swelling from the burn, and the priest is to pronounce him clean, for it is only the scar from the burn. If a man or woman has an infection on the head or chin, the priest shall examine the infection, and if it appears to be deeper than the skin and the hair in it is yellow and thin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. It is a scaly outbreak, an infectious disease of the head or chin. But if the priest examines the scaly infection and it does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, the priest shall isolate the infected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to re-examine the infection, and if the scaly outbreak has not spread and there is no yellow hair in it, and it does not appear to be deeper than the skin, then the person must shave himself except for the scaly area. Then the priest shall isolate him for another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine the scaly outbreak, and if it has not spread on the skin and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, the priest is to pronounce him clean. He must wash his clothes, and he will be clean. If, however, the scaly outbreak spreads further on the skin after his cleansing, the priest is to examine him, and if the scaly outbreak has spread on the skin, the priest need not look for yellow hair. The person is unclean. If, however, in his sight the scaly outbreak is unchanged, and black hair has grown in it, then it has healed. He is clean, and the priest is to pronounce him clean. When a man or a woman has white spots on the skin, the priest shall examine them, and if the spots are dull white, it is a harmless rash that has broken out on the skin. The person is clean. Now, if a man loses his hair and is bald, he is still clean. Or if his hairline recedes and he is bald on his forehead, he is still clean. But if there is a reddish-white sore on the bald head or forehead, it is an infectious disease breaking out on it. The priest is to examine him, and if the swelling of the infection on his bald head or forehead is reddish-white like a skin disease, the man is diseased. He is unclean. The priest must pronounce him unclean because of the infection on his head. A diseased person must wear torn clothes and let his hair hang loose, and he must cover his mouth and cry out, "Unclean! Unclean!" As long as he has the infection, he remains unclean. He must live alone in a place outside the camp. If any fabric is contaminated with mildew, any wool or linen garment, any weave or knit of linen or wool, or any article of leather, and if the mark in the fabric, leather, weave, knit, or leather article is green or red, then it is contaminated with mildew and must be shown to the priest. And the priest is to examine the mildew and isolate the contaminated fabric for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall re-examine it, and if the mildew has spread in the fabric, weave, knit, or leather, then regardless of how it is used. It is a harmful mildew. The article is unclean. He is to burn the fabric, weave, or knit, whether the contaminated item is wool or linen or leather, since the mildew is harmful. The article must be burned up. But when the priest re-examines it, if the mildew has not spread in the fabric, weave, knit, or leather article, the priest is to order the contaminated article to be washed and isolated for another 7 days. After it has been washed, the priest is to re-examine it, and if the mildewed article has not changed in appearance, it is unclean. Even though the mildew has not spread, you must not burn it, whether the rot is on the front or back. If the priest examines it and the mildew has faded after it has been washed, he must cut the contaminated section out of the fabric, leather, weave, or knit. But if it reappears in the fabric, weave, or knit, or on any leather article, it is spreading. You must burn the contaminated article. If the mildew disappears from the fabric, weave, or knit, or any leather article after washing, then it is to be washed again, and it will be clean. This is the law concerning a mildew contamination in wool or linen, fabric, weave, or knit, or any leather article, for pronouncing it clean or unclean. Leviticus 14 now. Man, 13 was a lot of stuff. Okay, Leviticus 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, "This is the law for the one affected with a skin disease on the day of his cleansing, when he is brought to the priest. The priest is to go outside the camp to examine him, and if the skin disease of the afflicted person has healed, the priest shall order that 2 live clean birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop, be brought for the one to be cleansed. Then the priest shall command that one of the birds be slaughtered over fresh water in a clay pot. And he is to take the live bird together with the cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop, and dip them into the blood of the bird that was slaughtered over the fresh water. 7 times he shall sprinkle the one to be cleansed of the skin disease. Then he shall pronounce him clean and release the live bird into the open field. The one being cleansed must wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe with water. Then he will be ceremonially clean. Afterward he may enter the camp, but he must remain outside his tent for 7 days. On the 7th day he must shave off all his hair, his head, his beard, his eyebrows, and the rest of his hair. He must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water, and he will be clean. On the 8th day he is to bring 2 unblemished male lambs, an unblemished ewe lamb, a year old, a grain offering of 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with olive oil, and 1 log of olive oil. The priest who performs the cleansing shall present the one to be cleansed, together with these offerings, before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Then the priest is to take one of the male lambs and present it as a guilt offering along with the log of olive oil, and he must wave them as a wave offering before the Lord. Then he is to slaughter the lamb in the sanctuary area where the sin offering and burnt offering are slaughtered. Like the sin offering, the guilt offering belongs to the priest. It is most holy. The priest is to take some of the blood from the guilt offering and put it on the right earlobe of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and the big toe of his right foot. Then the priest shall take some of the log of olive oil, pour it into his left palm, dip his right forefinger into the oil in his left palm, and sprinkle some of the oil with his finger 7 times before the Lord. And the priest is to put some of the oil remaining in his palm on the right earlobe of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on top of the blood of the guilt offering. The rest of the oil in his palm the priest is to put on the head of the one to be cleansed, to make atonement for him before the Lord. Then the priest is to sacrifice the sin offering and make atonement for the one to be cleansed from his uncleanness. After that the priest shall slaughter the burnt offering. and offer it on the altar with the grain offering to make atonement for him, and he will be clean. If, however, the person is poor and cannot afford these offerings, he is to take one male lamb as a guilt offering to be waved to make atonement for him, along with 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with olive oil for a grain offering, a log of olive oil, and 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, whichever he can afford, one to be a sin offering and the other a burnt offering. On the 8th day he is to bring them for his cleansing to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting before the Lord. The priest shall take the lamb for the guilt offering along with the log of olive oil and wave them as a wave offering before the Lord. And after he slaughters the lamb for the guilt offering, the priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the right earlobe of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. And then the priest is to pour some of the oil into his left palm and sprinkle with his right forefinger some of the oil in his left palm 7 times before the Lord. The priest shall also put some of the oil in his palm on his right earlobe of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the same places as the blood of the guilt offering. The rest of the oil in his palm the priest is to put on the head of the one to be cleansed to make atonement for him before the Lord. Then he must sacrifice the turtle doves or young pigeons, whichever he can afford. One as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, together with the grain offering. In this way the priest will make atonement before the Lord for the one to be cleansed. This is the law for someone who has a skin disease and cannot afford the cost of his cleansing. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When you enter the land of Canaan, which I am giving you as your possession, and I put a contamination of mildew into a house in that land, the owner of the house shall come and tell the priest something like, 'Mildew has appeared in my house.' The priest must order that the house be cleared before he enters it to examine the mildew, so that nothing in the house will become unclean. After this, the priest shall go in to inspect the house. He is to examine the house, and if the mildew on the walls consists of green or red depressions that appear to be beneath the surface of the wall, the priest shall go outside the doorway of the house and close it up for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to return and inspect the house. If the mildew has spread on the walls, he must order that the contaminated stones be pulled out and thrown into an unclean place outside the city. And he shall have the inside of the house scraped and completely, and the plaster that is scraped off dumped into an unclean place outside the city. So different stones must be obtained to replace the contaminated ones, as well as additional mortar to replaster the house. If the mildew reappears in the house after the stones have been torn out, and the house has been scraped and replastered, the priest must come and inspect it. If the mildew has spread in the house, it is a destructive mildew. The house is unclean. It must be torn down with its stones, its timbers, and all its plaster, and taken outside the city to an unclean place. Anyone who enters the house during any of the days that it is closed up will be unclean until evening, and anyone who sleeps in the house or eats in it must wash his clothes. If, however, the priest comes and inspects it, and the mildew has not spread after the house has been replastered, he shall pronounce the house clean because the mildew is gone. He is to take 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop to purify the house. And he shall slaughter one of the birds over fresh water in a clay pot. Then he shall take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet yarn, and the live bird, dip them in the blood of the slaughtered bird and the fresh water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. And he shall cleanse the house with the bird's blood, the fresh water, the live bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet yarn. Finally, he is to release the live bird into the open fields outside the city. In this way he will make an atonement for the house, and it will be clean. This is the law for any infectious skin disease, for a scaly outbreak, for mildew in the clothing or in a house, and for a swelling rash or spot, to determine when something is clean or unclean. This is the law regarding skin diseases and mildew. Leviticus 15 now. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, say to the Israelites, when any man has a bodily discharge, the discharge is unclean. This uncleanness is from his discharge, whether his body allows the discharge to flow or blocks it. So his discharge will bring about uncleanness. Any bed on which the man with the discharge lies will be unclean, and any furniture on which he sits will be unclean. Anyone who touches his bed must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until evening. Whoever sits on furniture on which the man with the discharge was sitting must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until evening. Whoever touches the body of the man with a discharge must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until evening. If the man with the discharge spits on one who is clean, that person must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until evening. Any saddle on which the man with the discharge rides will be unclean. Whoever touches anything that was under him will be unclean until evening, and whoever carries such things must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until evening. If the man with the discharge touches anyone without first rinsing his hands with water, the one who was touched must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until evening. Any clay pot that the man with the discharge touches must be broken, and any wooden utensil must be rinsed with water. When the man has been cleansed from his discharge, he must count off 7 days for his cleansing, wash his clothes, and bathe himself in fresh water, and he shall be clean. On the 8th day he is to take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, come before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and give them to the priest. The priest is to sacrifice them, one as a sin offering, and the other as a burnt offering. In this way the priest will make atonement for the man before the Lord because of his discharge. When a man has an emission of semen, he must bathe his whole body with water, and he will be unclean until evening. Any clothing or leather on which there is an emission of semen must be washed with water, and it will remain unclean until evening. If a man lies with a woman and there is an emission of semen, both must bathe with water, and they will remain unclean until evening. When a woman has a discharge consisting of blood from her body, she will be unclean due to her menstruation for 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean until morning. Anything on which she lies or sits during her menstruation will be unclean, and anyone who touches her bed must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until evening. Whoever touches any furniture on which she was sitting must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until evening. And whether it is a bed or furniture on which she was sitting, whoever touches it will be unclean until evening. If a man lies with her and her menstrual flow touches him, he will be unclean for 7 days, and any bed on which he lies will become unclean. When a woman has a discharge of her blood for many days at a time, other than her menstrual period, or if it continues beyond her period, she will be unclean all the days of her unclean discharge, just as she is during the days of her menstruation. Any bed on which she lies or any furniture on which she sits during the days of her discharge will be unclean, like her bed during her menstrual period. Anyone who touches these things will be unclean. He must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until evening. When a woman is cleansed of her discharge, she must count off 7 days, and after that she will be ceremonially clean. On the 8th day she is to take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and bring them to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The priest is to sacrifice one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement for her before the Lord for her unclean discharge. You must keep the children of Israel separate from their uncleanness, so that they do not die by defiling my tabernacle which is among them. This is the law of him who has a discharge, of the man who has an emission of semen whereby he is unclean, of a woman in her menstrual period, of any male or female who has a discharge, and of a man who lies with an unclean woman. Leviticus 16. Now the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of two of Aaron's sons when they approached the presence of the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron not to enter freely into the most holy place behind the veil, in front of the mercy seat on the ark, or else he will die, because I appear in the cloud above the mercy seat. This is how Aaron is to enter the holy place, with a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He is to wear the sacred linen tunic with linen undergarments. He must tie a linen sash around him and put on the linen turban. These are holy garments, and he must bathe himself with water before he wears them. And he shall take from the congregation of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering, and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Aaron is to present the bull for his sin offering and make atonement for himself and his household. Then he shall take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. After Aaron casts lots for the 2 goats, one for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat, he shall present the goat chosen by lot for the Lord and sacrifice it as a sin offering. But the goat chosen by lot as the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement by sending it into the wilderness as the scapegoat. When Aaron presents the bull for his sin offering and makes atonement for himself and his household, he is to slaughter the bull for his own sin offering. Then he must take a censer full of burning coals from the altar before the Lord, and 2 handfuls of finely ground fragrant incense, and take them inside the veil. He is to put the incense on the fire before the Lord, and the cloud of incense will cover the mercy seat above the testimony, so that he will not die. And he is to take some of the bull's blood and sprinkle it with the finger on the east side of the mercy seat. Then he shall sprinkle some of it with his finger 7 times before the mercy seat. Aaron shall then slaughter the goat for the sin offering for the people, and bring its blood behind the veil, and with its blood he must do as he did with the bull's blood. He is to sprinkle it against the mercy seat and in front of it. So he shall make atonement for the most holy place because of the impurities and rebellious acts of the Israelites in regard to all their sins. He is to do the same for the tent of meeting which abides among them, because it is surrounded by their impurities. No one may be in the tent of meeting from the time Aaron goes in to make atonement in the most holy place until he leaves, after he has made atonement for himself, his household, and the whole assembly of Israel. Then he shall go out to the altar that is before the Lord, and make atonement for it. He is to take some of the bull's blood and some of the goat's blood, and put it on all the horns of the altar. He is to sprinkle some of the blood on it with his finger 7 times to cleanse it and consecrate it from the uncleanness of the Israelites. When Aaron has finished purifying the most holy place, the tent of meeting, and the altar, he is to bring forward the live goat. Then he is to lay both hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities and rebellious acts of the Israelites in regard to all their sins. He is to put them on the goat's head and send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a man appointed to the task. The goat will carry on itself all their iniquities into a solitary place, and the man will release it into the wilderness. Then Aaron is to enter the tent of meeting, take off the linen garments he put on before the entering of the most holy place, and leave them there. He is to bathe himself with water in a holy place, and put on his own clothes. Then he must go out and sacrifice his burnt offering and the people's burnt offering to make atonement for himself and for the people. He is also to burn the fat of the sin offering on the altar. The man who released the goat as the scapegoat must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water. Afterward, he may re-enter the camp. The bull for the sin offering and the goat for the sin offering, whose blood was brought into the most holy place to make atonement, must be taken outside the camp, and their hides, flesh, and dung must be burned up. The one who burns them must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water, and afterward he may re-enter the camp. This is to be a permanent statute for you. On the 10th day of the 7th month you shall humble yourselves and not do any work, whether the native or the foreigner who resides among you. Because on this day of atonement because on this day atonement will be made for you to cleanse you, and you will be clean from all your sins before the Lord. It is a Sabbath of complete rest for you, that you may humble yourselves. It is a permanent statute. The priest who is anointed and ordained to succeed his father as high priest shall make atonement. He will put on the sacred linen garments and make atonement for the most holy place, the tent of meeting, and the altar, and for the priests and all the people of the assembly. This is to be a permanent statute for you, to make atonement once a year for the Israelites because of all their sins. And all this was done as the Lord commanded Moses. Okay, that concludes our time in Leviticus for today. Now we are in Hebrews, and this is chapter 7. This Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, and Abraham apportioned to him a tenth of everything. First, his name means king of righteousness. Then also king of Salem means king of peace. Without father or mother or genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, like the Son of God, he remains a priest for all time. Consider how great Melchizedek was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder. Now the law commands the sons of Levi who become priests to collect a tenth from their people, that is, from their brothers, though they too are descended from Abraham. But Melchizedek, who did not trace his descent from Levi, collected a tenth from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. And indisputably the lesser is blessed by the greater. In the case of the Levites, mortal men collect the tenth. But in the case of Melchizedek, it is affirmed that he lives on. And so to speak, Levi, who collects the tenth, paid the tenth through Abraham. For when Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi was still in the loin of his ancestor. Now, if perfection could have been attained through the Levitical priesthood, for on this basis the people received the law, why was there still need for another priest to appear, one in the order of Melchizedek and not in the order of Aaron? For when the priesthood is changed, the law must be changed as well. He of whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, from which no one has ever served at the altar, for it is clear that our Lord descended from Judah, a tribe as to which Moses said nothing about priests. And this point is even more clear if another priest like Melchizedek appears, one who has become a priest not by a law of succession, but by the power of an indestructible life. For it is testified, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. So the former commandment is set aside because it was weak and useless, for the law made nothing perfect, and a better hope is introduced by which we draw near to God. And none of this happened without an oath. For others became priests without an oath, but Jesus became a priest with an oath by the one who said to him, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever." Because of this oath, Jesus has become the guarantee of a better covenant. Now there have been many other priests since death prevented them from continuing in office. But because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to intercede for them. Such a high priest truly benefits us, one who is holy, innocent, undefiled, set apart from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other high priests, he does not need to offer daily sacrifices, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for sin once for all when he offered up himself. For the law appoints as high priests men who are weak, but the oath which came after the law appointed the Son who has been made perfect forever. Hebrews chapter 8. The point of what we are saying is this. We do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, and who ministers in the sanctuary and true tabernacle set up by the Lord, not by man. And since every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices, it was necessary for this one also to have something to offer. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest, since there are already priests who offer gifts according to the law. The place where they serve is a copy and shadow of what is in heaven. This is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. Now, however, Jesus has received a much more excellent ministry, just as the covenant he mediates is a better one and is founded on better promises. For if that first covenant had been without fault, no place would have been sought for a second. But God found fault with the people and said, Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their fathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they did not abide by my covenant, and I disregarded them, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and inscribe them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will each one teach his neighbor, or his brother, saying, Know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their iniquities and will remember their sins no more. By speaking of a new covenant, he has made the first one obsolete, and what is obsolete and aging will soon disappear. This is the word of the Lord. The stuff in Hebrews is worth reading again if this theology is new to you, but this is really quite important for understanding how it is that Christ actually achieves salvation for sins, how it is that we can take comfort in him being our great high priest. And so, and I hope you see kind of the overlap between the concern for God's law and the instructions that he gave in Leviticus and the way in which it's fulfilled in Christ in Hebrews. So I hope these things are opening up to you. If they're not, just spend more time with it. All these things get more and more familiar the more you spend time with it. Don't get discouraged if this is your first time through. Your brain will start making connections your second, third, fourth, fifth time through. It'll be great. I hope you enjoy that. All right, that'll conclude today's time together. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow.